You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, and we're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As a prompt for our conversation this morning, let's listen into this background by our correspondent, Aisha Obali.
Over the years, Nigeria has been generating electricity in commercial quantities. In spite of this, the pace of electricity infrastructure development in the country has remained slow, while power supply remains highly inadequate. In 2013, two segments of Nigeria's power sector, generation and distribution, were privatized to resolve the challenges associated with the monopoly in power generation, transmission and distribution. However, privatization only changed the dimensions of the challenges, and power supply remains largely inadequate, unaffordable and unreliable in the country. Currently, 25 million Nigerians are not connected to the national power grid, and for those connected, power supply is a serious problem, as about approximately 90% of total power demanded is not supplied. The problem of meeting the power target cuts across all states in the country, but Nigeria's electricity demand was estimated at 24,380 megawatts in 2015. For government to see how it can improve access to power, the federal government next week will commence the installation of 5 million solar home system worth 140 billion naira in underserved and off-grid communities across the country. This, according to the presidency, is in continuation of coordinated implementation of the economic sustainability plan across the country. How would this program impact the country's power sector? Will it just be for communities of the national grid? What are the targets? These and more will be answered by our guest shortly on Good Morning Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Aisha Obali, for that background. With us in the studios now to discuss this issue in further detail, let's welcome the Managing Director of the Rural Electrification Agency. It's Ahmed Salhijo. Ahmed, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Also here with us is the project lead of Hash Solar Power Nigeria, Suleiman Babamanu. Suleiman, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Okay, we also have here with us solar power developer Ifeanyi Rajaka. Also a pleasure to have you, Ifeanyi, with us.
Yeah, good morning, Nigeria, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, gentlemen, let's begin by just having a clearer understanding of what we are getting into with the solar home systems. What is it all about? Who is going to benefit and where? Let's begin with Salhijo, who is the MD of Rural Electrification Agency. What are we getting into now?
Thank you very much. Essentially, the Solar Home Systems Program under the Economic Sustainability Plan looks at providing power, as you rightly mentioned, to unserved and underserved areas within the country. The target is to have 5 million connections, which will go as far as having effect on 25 million Nigerians. But I'm sure, as Ifeanyi would testify, being a sector player, most of what we have currently within the industry products that are imported. So the whole idea of the economic sustainability plan is to be able to encourage local participation, local assembly and manufacturing of some of the solar home products and some of the components of the mini grids as well. So what you find is that currently private developers are going into these businesses, but they end up importing most of the products. So as part of the economic sustainability plan, looking at the value chain, what you find is that if we are able to assemble more of these products locally, we create jobs. And with the economic sustainability plan, it has a target of creating up to 250,000 jobs. And some of the requirements that have been put in place is that the companies must have at least a minimum of 70% local content. So if you look at it, given the pandemic, with us rolling out this program in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Power, is to ensure that these products that we have for the solar home systems is reaching out to the locals, and the businesses are being sort of emphasized on a local basis. So this is why the program has been rolled out, just to cushion the effect of the pandemic, and it's a very deliberate attempt to do that. So this is what we're looking to do.
Okay, I get the idea that the whole essence of this is to electrify the rural areas, correct, to make power supply accessible to those in the rural areas that are not connected to the national grid. Absolutely. Is that it? Now, if you consider the cost of solar, solar power, how accessible will it be to the end users who are in the rural areas? And what form of the solar home systems are you providing?
Well, thank you very much for that. So I think that essentially depends on the community in which you are deploying the technology. Typically, for off-grid communities, there are various options. There are some communities that unfortunately are not connected to the grid. However, if they are a few kilometers away from the grid, you are able to apply grid extension projects, so where you can put in maybe a few transformers and be able to connect them to the grid. However, in situations where those communities are too far away from the grid, maybe you're talking about 10-15 kilometers, what you need to do is to be able to generate that power within the community for them to consume. So this is where you have the two technologies, the mini grid and the solar home systems. So for the mini grid, it obviously caters for a bigger community. So you're talking about households of maybe 200 and 250 above. But with the solar home systems, you're talking about smaller communities where you deploy the technology within that particular home. So for instance, you can see it around capacities just a few kilowatts, where you can provide that power for that particular home, and they will be able to have maybe a few lighting points and a fan, etc. But with the mini grids, you're talking about bigger capacities for up to maybe 100 to 150 kilowatts, where they are able to now deploy that power to help them maybe in some of their economic activities, like some small businesses, maybe like agriculture, so that they can use it for productive use. So for us, the main aim is not about taking the electricity to the rural area, but how does the rural area and how do the rural dwellers use that electricity to enhance their own livelihoods.
So is it a hybrid or strictly solar home systems for this exercise?
It's predominantly solar home systems, but we are going to deploy mini grids and interconnected mini grids as well. So it all depends on the analysis that we do of the community and which technology suits the community the best.
All right, thank you very much, Salahijo. Suleiman Babamanu, let's bring you in now into the conversation. You may wish to elaborate on the points already articulated by the Managing Director of the Rural Electrification Agency.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning again, Nigerians. So the Rural Electrification Agency is the implementing agency for the 5 Million Connections program, of course, led by our Managing Director, Engineer Ahmed Salihijo. So just like the MD mentioned, the objectives of the program is to connect 5 million homes and businesses across rural communities in Nigeria, provide 250,000 jobs, as well as, increase and develop the local value chain in manufacturing and assembly. So what we do at the REA is to ensure that there's a seamless process of applications and disbursement for companies that are applying into this program. So just to give a short overview of what the program is about in terms of the financing. So one of the key challenges of the off-grid space and the off-grid developers is the fact that they have limited access to low-cost financing in local currency. So this program is one of the key issues that this program intends to sort of solve, is to provide private sector companies, which the government is partnering with, to be able to deliver these connections in form of solar home systems or mini grids. So what you would have in this program is companies are able to access loans at an interest rate of about 10% for mini grid and solar home systems companies. You would have working capital capped up at 500 million, and 70%, you would have access to 70% of your project cost to be able to develop these mini grids. So for solar home systems, you have a working capital of capped at 500 million. So you begin to see how, if you compare this to what companies are able to access in the conventional sort of commercial bank rates, so it allows for scaling up of businesses for private companies. For a country like Nigeria that have taken the private sector-led approach in rural electrification, it's a very, very huge step for the country that has been working very, very hard in terms of scaling up the off-grid space, from regulations to providing grants, and now providing low capital, low interest loans to private companies.
This appears to be a kind of intervention, for the benefit of the solar power developers, isn't it? Just to enable them, provide this service, isn't it, Mr. Suleiman?
So that's right.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, so the intervention is a 140 billion naira intervention from the CBN.
Okay.
So private sector companies, as I mentioned earlier, are able to access these loans. So what we do at the REA is to ensure that the right companies with the right capacity are able to apply and are able to access this funding and are able to deliver these connections at an affordable and efficient rate to the end users.
Is your business in this, is it solely financing, or it relates to both financing and execution of the project?
That's right. So as the implementing agency, we carry out all the technical due diligence and also the financial due diligence alongside the CBN. So our responsibility cuts across providing access to that financing, as well as the monitoring and evaluation of the program, ensuring that the project is executed, the right type of quality of products are actually deployed. As we know, there has been over time some sort of misconception about the solar technology for some people who think that the technology is not very effective, and that's because the right type of technology isn't actually used. So what we're doing at the REA is to ensure that companies, the right companies with the right capacity, with the right financial and technical capacity, are doing this work. And then we carry out the monitoring and evaluation, making sure that the connections are actually done. We have an independent verification agent that verifies all of the connections. And, we ensure that companies have warranties, after-sales services, customer service that would ensure sustainability of the project.
What are the end users expected? What burden are the end users expected to carry if this is a kind of intervention for the operators, for the service providers? So, what will be the burden bestowed upon the end users in terms of accessibility and affordability?
So, as we know, the upfront capital for solar installation is very, very high. So what this intervention does is to allow end users to access clean and reliable energy without necessarily sort of spending so much money in trying to acquire these equipment. So for a mini grid, for example, the private developer would go to a community, would build this decentralized system in the community, connect all of the customers. Each customer would have a meter. So the burden on the end user is to, for somebody who has signed up to be connected to that mini grid, is to pay for the services that has been rendered to him. And unlike what we see in the grid space, for example, where customers sometimes are not metered, in this case it's a bottom-up approach. You carry out an assessment of what the customer needs, the demand, and the system design that would suit that particular customer. Now you provide that service and the customer pays for exactly what they consume. So the community, for example, now has to, under the regulation, you have to sign an exclusivity agreement with the developer for a mini grid. You have to now agree on a tariff that would be paid by this community, and then the end user would have to, depending on what you agree, weekly or monthly charge of the power that has been rendered.
And I suppose that also applies to the solar home systems.
Exactly. So the solar home systems, unlike the mini grid, is a smaller plug-and-play system where that comes, the smallest one coming with maybe just 1 or 2 light bulbs, that scales up, just like my MD just mentioned, to having a fan, a TV, and in some cases you would have a fridge. So depending on what the customer needs, that is what he's been provided. Different companies apply different business models. So companies mostly charge a weekly rate, which could be somewhere on the minimum being around 100 to 150 naira. To that rises up depending on the capacity of the system. So you get what you demand for, and what you typically see in rural communities is you give a customer or a household maybe a system that has maybe just 2 light bulbs. The next 2 or 3 months they come back and say they want a fan, and that's what you find with energy access. The demand always grow, so customers are able to pay to own the system eventually over time, depending on what is agreed between the customer and the service provider.
Thank you. Ifeanyi or Rajaka, what does this mean for a solar power developer in the local environment?
Yeah. Good morning again, Nigerian. So for us from the private sector, this is actually a very timely intervention from the government. Take for instance, us here in GVE, we started the company as undergraduate students about a decade ago, and we happened to pioneer the PV solar mini grid for energy access subsector in not just Nigeria but also in the West African region. And since then till now, the industry have faced several challenges. One, starting from the acceptability of the technology. Does this actually work? Going to, what policy would be in place to actually drive and ensure sustainable growth of the sector? And having surmounted all those, in recent times, the current challenge is actually how do we then scale this technology to ensure that as many Nigerians are able to access this reliable electricity service. And one of the critical things that I would want to also point out in this conversation is even though we fix all the issues we have with the national grid at the moment, as a date, about 45% of Nigeria won't still have access to electricity. And judging by our current population, we're talking about 90 million or slightly more people, and that's where or how you get to appreciate the importance of this scheme, because it will help to drive energy access to locations, communities, and people who currently are underserved or unserved by power from the national grid. And as private sector, this has been one of the things we have been seeking from government, to create some sort of intervention fund on a concessionary rate, because for us in GVE, for instance, we've been exposed to some international funding because of the inability or the unavailability of a scheme like this. And you can imagine what that means for us as a business, with the recent escalation over the years and currency risk, exposing businesses in this sector to an unquantifiable amount of risk, because we have to meet our repayment obligations to our international financiers. And aside from that putting pressure on the businesses, as a business, we also have no option but to pass on those additional costs to our off-takers as well. But with an intervention like this, it helps to cushion the effect of this, and it will go a long way to ensure the long-term affordability of the services that private sector players in the renewable energy industry are able to.
Is there a viable market? Because this is one of the issues, why private investors are not keen, in investing in this area, and a reason again why the federal government is, coming out with this intervention. Have you really studied the market in terms of the per capita, consumption rate, and ultimately the energy consumption level of especially those that will be using the solar home systems?
Yeah, so as GVE currently is the biggest mini-grid developer indigenous in the sub-Saharan Africa. Currently, we have presence in over about 14 different communities, scattered around 8 different states in 4 different regions of the country, and that puts us in a vantage position to actually appreciate on a national basis what the microeconomic indices and ability and willingness to pay of people in the hinterland. And it might surprise you that even though we feel they are unable to pay, but on the hand side, as we know today, energy is an indisputable necessity, because in the current 21st century, humanity have evolved to the pace that we can't do without energy. Because they lack energy from the national grid, they are forced to explore other alternatives like candles, batteries, petrol generators, diesel generators. And unlike those living in urban centers, they pay like 2 times in most cases to access these services, because we conducted extensive surveys to actually find out what their energy situations were before we carry out our interventions. And it's led to, by introducing them to reliable electricity with solar, it's led to astronomical levels of improvement in livelihood, and also catalyzing the productivity of their from an economic and social standpoint in these communities. So I want to cite a particular case. One of our customers in a community called Bisanti community, in Niger State, prior to our intervention, Mr. Alhaji Musa, he operates a convenience store which he used to power by diesel, in an old diesel generator, and that the maintenance issues, the operating cost that is associated with that, to a large extent stifled the growth of his business. But by transitioning to mini-grid powered by GVE since 2015, he has now grown his business by a factor of 5x. He has increased the number of freezers he has in his store, and also he is now talking of setting up a sachet water producing factory, and because now he's able to access a more reliable and also affordable service than what he was using prior to the intervention. And I would say since 2015 that we deployed that solution, commissioned in October 2015 precisely, the community in Bisanti have been enjoying 24 hours uninterrupted power supply which is something that we can't even find in the capital city of Abuja.
Thank you. Fine, Orajaka. Once again, let's bring in the Managing Director of the Rural Electrification Agency. I think we would require some more explanation as to the delivery procedure for this scheme, Nigeria Solar Home System. How earlier Suleiman explained that yes, government is involved in financing, it's also involved in the implementation. What is the delivery procedure? Who picks out the community? What is the role of the REA? What is the role of the subnational governments? Because the federal government doesn't have a rural community of its own.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'm happy that we're here and we have a perspective from the private developers as well. So as you have rightly alluded to, government always plays a role in creating the enabling environment. So at the REA, what we've always tried to do is we've appreciated the fact that government money is never going to be enough to cater for the 80 million to 90 million Nigerians that currently do not have access to power. So for our role, we'll continue to create that enabling environment for the likes of GVE to come in and bring in their investment. So currently at the REA, we run a program as well called the Nigerian Electrification Program, which is made up of funding from the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. So the idea is that that funding has currently been used as subsidy or grants to players like GVE, so that they are able to bring in their own private sector expertise and their own funding. And this funding that they bring in from the REA, we now give them grants and subsidies. So in addition to the NEP program, we also have the Rural Electrification Fund, which means that when a private developer like Ifeanyi deploys that mini grid, and makes those connections, government now pays them a subsidy that would now help in terms of their capital expenditure. So this now ties in very well with the CBN intervention that is currently being rolled out. So at both ends, you have financing coming in to help private sector, so that investment is being done in such a way that it's not such a burden to the end user, as you rightly mentioned. So in terms of the delivery, of course, the REA, being the implementation agency, continues to guide the process so that we bring in players within the private sector that can deploy their expertise and financing to ensure that these projects are delivered from start to finish. So this is the role the REA would play.
But I think you've seen it to further clarify the question Kingsley asked. And for me, I also like to know how the end users are mapped. How do you determine, the communities where the services will be provided? Who does, how will the delivery be done? You said you are providing a guide, to the facilitators.
Yes.
But what about the actual delivery? Okay. Who does it? Do you have middlemen?
No, we work directly with the private developers. However, I don't know if you've been following, just last week or so, the Federal Ministry of Power, in conjunction with the NESP program, launched this platform called the Sustainable Energy for All platform, where the platform is supposed to identify unserved or underserved Nigerians nationwide. So what this program would now do is it will work with such platforms. Then we will now identify areas where there is no grid. So those are the kind of information that we pass on to the private developers. So from a nationwide perspective, we have a global or a national view of areas where there's off-grid communities. And of course, these are the communities that would interest the likes of GVE, where they would now, as you mentioned earlier, go into those communities, apply, some of these studies around the willingness to pay, which of course at the REA as well, we continue to work on having this universal access guide. So with that information, the likes of GVE, through programs like the Nigerian Electrification Project, the Rural Electrification Fund, and the CBN intervention now, are able to now make an informed decision onto which communities within the country they are able to deploy this technology, so that they have a good return on investment, and at the same time deploy them in areas where we know there are economic activities. So that data is actually available, even though at the moment the whole country has not been covered. It's something that is currently being evolved, that is currently evolving. But with the official launch of that platform now, last week or so, we will have access to that data, and for the 5 million solar home systems program, we will be working with that data, and we'll be making that available to the private developers.
So in essence, this is less a development program and more of a market idea to say, look, right, the federal government is there, provides the funding, support funding to private developers, who then go to identify potential communities.
Absolutely.
Again, based on your guidelines, and then they make out all the arrangements and so on. But I just would like Suleiman Babamanu to also come in here, because again, back to the question of delivery procedure. I asked the question advisedly. We know that at the subnational level, state governments also embark on their own rural electrification programs. Then lawmakers also choose rural electrification or electrification of their communities as their constituency projects. So you go to some locations, and I've seen that chaos. You will see cables being drawn by Rural Electrification Agency of the federal government, cables being drawn by the state government, cables and all kinds of things. In the end, the communities have no light, they have nothing. That's why I'm asking, what is the delivery procedure for this one? So that the chaos we had in the past doesn't then repeat itself, and in the end, the total objective is not realized.
Yes, thank you very much. So just like the MD rightly mentioned, about the right type of technology and the least cost electrification model that can be applied for a community. In fact, that's the exact reason why the problem you mentioned right now about, grid extension not fully utilized is the exact reason why the government of Nigeria introduced and is backing upon the decentralized energy approach. Because these lines are not, they're quite expensive, and it requires the distribution network to connect to before electrons can now start passing through. So in terms of the approach, you go to a community that is densely populated, that has some level of productive uses in the sense of businesses and sort of activities that support the economy of the community. They have the right number of households. So you immediately begin to see, when you start to carry out energy demand assessment, enumeration of customers, you begin to see how the capacity of demand begins to grow, and it would give you an idea of whether that community would be best served by a mini grid, or even if, for example, like the MD mentioned, if the grid is not too far and you have a good chance of being connected by the disco, extend the grid. Or if it's a community that is slightly less populated than what we have seen in a mini grid, and the household are sparsely distributed, there you can apply solar home systems, because now the cost of distribution becomes very expensive. And once the investment becomes too expensive, the tariff becomes too high, and that is what we try to avoid, so that the end user would not be burdened. So the approach is like the MD mentioned, we have a huge database of communities that have been mapped out with support from donors. Willingness and ability to pay has been sort of analyzed, and we're able to pinpoint locations where investment can be made. Of course, with the state government, this program is deliberately going to be working with the state government to further help identify these communities. But we also need to remember that at the end of the day, it is a commercial decision that needs to be made by the investor, because you are taking a loan as an investor, as a developer, that you have to pay back over time, depending on what you're applying for. So it's a combination of the right locations, what makes a best commercial decision, and what technology suits that particular community to be able to, service that community better. So what we are doing at the REA is supporting that process, identifying these locations. Whatever you do in that community, the developer and the investor would have to do their own assessment again and their due diligence just to validate the type of data that you have provided to them. But yes, we're working with the state government, to work closely with the REBs in the respective states, and also guiding the private developers with the essential type of data to make that investment decision.
Let's stay with the home systems, and even here in the capital city, and of course on the outskirts of Abuja, you see a lot of your what do you call it? Your panels, solar panels. Some abandoned, different types, and probably because of inability to replace them, they're just lying there. So that speaks to to the integrity and quality of the kind of panels that will be installed. And if you consider that those in the rural areas are basically agrarian, or farmers who probably would have would not have ready, what would I say, available access to finance, to replacing some of the. So who bears the responsibility of, these labs? Who takes responsibility? Is it the private provider or is it REA?
Yeah, so that's a very, very useful and very, very important question. And this whole intervention and this whole program the REA is doing is mostly centered around sustainability of these projects. If you issue a contract to a developer, and that, for example, to do a mini grid without the requisite O&M, that's operations and maintenance, embedded in that contract, you definitely get to a point where the batteries especially needs to be replaced over time. We know they have a life cycle, depending on the quality of battery, from 2 years up to 10 years. So it gets to a time where these batteries would have to be replaced. And if that contractor has, gone from that community, it begs the question: who handles the replacement? So, and that's why the private sector-led approach is a very, very important one. They invest their own money. The government is supporting the business with grants and subsidies and low-cost financing. But at the end of the day, there is a payback period on return on investment for the developer, and over time. So within that period and beyond that period, because they're going to continue making money, they carry out the operations and maintenance of that infrastructure. That is the generation asset, the distribution asset, and the metering. For a mini grid, you would find, I think, if you can testify, you usually have companies, employing some of the locals, training them in customer service, in some basic technical skills that they can able to sort of maintain the system. Of course, if a problem becomes escalated, then you have to bring in experts from outside the community. So they bear the cost for a mini grid, maintain the system, ensure that the service is being delivered. And of course, for the solar home systems, what we also look out for when you're submitting your request, first of all, is the quality of system that you're providing. Ensure that it meets all the sort of IEC standards and Lighting Global standards. You have your warranty periods, and we also look at your after-sales service, especially because, the same way over time, depending on the business model, customers would eventually own the system, but the after-sales service would continue. So up until when the customer owns the system, the company is in charge of, replacing all of the, components that are damaged or repaired, especially if it's covered over the warranty period. So just in a nutshell, developers are responsible for the operations. So
they bear the liability.
Exactly.
Okay. So we know whom to
I'm
hold.
just wondering, there are a number of issues that we'll still need to dwell on, but you are in this business for purposes of better understanding. Countries such as those in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly the Scandinavian countries, have been doing a lot to harvest solar power for use. And in some cases, you find that the amount of energy they're able to generate is huge. There are also instances where they have created bicycle paths, where you ride on a bicycle and it charges and it creates light. Now, you come back to the Nigerian environment. A number of state governments in the past, particularly in this Fourth Republic, made a song and dance of solar-powered street lighting. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. In urban areas, they would have a ceremony more costly than the cost of installing the solar system in the first instance. And a couple of months down the road, you'll see the lights will start dimming, as if it has cataract, and after a while, it goes blind completely. So, what is the problem? Some people will tell you it's the battery, another person will tell you it's the cell that there's dust on it. What is the issue that we can't, first of all, harvest solar energy for, much more elaborate use, and even the ones that we're able to harvest, after a while, particularly the ones used for street lighting, people will dance in the night, and after a while, everybody starts going back into their homes.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and I think it's a very wonderful observation. So, to a large extent, it alludes to what Suleiman mentioned earlier. So, it's all about stewardship and accountability, and it also alludes to the fact that the government have had their ears on the ground. So perhaps in the past, most of the public procurements were more of a one-way sort of schemes without factoring in the long-term sustainability of some of the systems that are being deployed. But I mentioned earlier that we have a community that have been enjoying uninterrupted power supply for as much as 5 years, and we even have some other communities who have been enjoying the same level of service for as much as 7 years. And I feel, or practically, it's been possible because of the level of sustainability and stewardship driven from private sector perspective, because the business model that is being used to drive these interventions are more of a service-based, and that puts the private sector on its toes, because you only make money when you provide the service, and if you don't provide the service, that means you won't be able to make money, and you won't be able to service the facility. So it to a large extent adds to the sustainability of this, and with these 5 million solar intervention, which has been structured by the government to be private sector led, we're going to see an entirely different scenario, because being driven by a private sector and also having some level of counterpart commitment from the private sector, it will go a long way to ensure the economic and technical sustainability of that. And I believe the government were encouraged or were able to make this bold leap because they've seen this work in several instances across the country.
You are speaking for the company you represent, and I want to believe that there are other also private developers involved in this scheme, MD. So my question to you will be: we are all privy, to the topsy-turvy ride with the discourse in the area of power generation. This is another of such intervention. How do we avoid falling into such pitfalls again? How do we avoid history repeating itself, here again?
Okay, I think to your point about how do we avoid having this sort of issues, as we are at the moment, we are in a position where this sort of interventions are actually there to even strengthen some of our relationship with discourse. So when you have this sort of technologies and they are able to integrate with the discourse, I think it really helps all of us, because we have a few circumstances now where some of these private developers are also actually interested not only in isolated mini-grids, but they are now going into interconnected mini-grids as well. So they work closely with the discourse, and in areas where the discourse have willing to pay customers and they are not able to give them the electricity that they need, private developers have offered now to also come in and build a mini-grid within that discourse network, where they can now interconnect and partner with discourse. So we've actually had a few projects that have been launched on this sort of platform. So to your point, I can understand that yes, we've had issues in the past, but I think moving forward, this is going to strengthen the position of even the discourse. So I've had interesting conversations with some discourse within with the REA, and they are very, very open to this sort of arrangement where the private developer would come in and augment the power that they are providing and be able to now share in profit. So even within the 5 million solar home systems, depending on where the community is, it is actually open to having interconnected mini-grids as well. So not just the solar home systems or the isolated mini-grids. We could also have a scenario where these funds can be accessed and be able to be deployed for interconnected mini-grids.
Okay, thank you very much, Salahijo. One more time, Solomon, I don't know. I don't want to get into analysis paralysis because earlier we had elaborated on the key benefits of this program. But have you looked at the legal perspective? Because we were talking earlier about pricing. Is NEC involved in this? That's to say, Electricity Regulatory Commission. What is the relationship between NEC and all of this arrangement, particularly the ROEA? That's one. Second point is, what is also the role of the Federal Competition Commission? Because earlier you were also talking about communities signing exclusive contracts with the developer. So there's no opportunity for competition, and therefore some persons might argue, depending on the wording of the contract, that you are in breach of antitrust laws. So again, as I said, I'm wary of getting into analysis paralysis, but are all of this considered? And if so, could you just speak on them very quickly?
Suleiman, so in less than 60 seconds, please, because we've run out of time. Yes.
Yes. So, the question you asked are related. Regulation, of course, under the mini-grid space, Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission has provided a very clear regulation on what happens when you are invested in a mini-grid, and that's the guiding principle. It's important to note that this is one of the best regulations that we have seen in Africa. It's very clear on what capacity attracts a permit or a registration what happens when the grid arrives and what you need to do to sign that exclusivity agreement with the community. So what that means, because it takes a while for companies to develop a mini grid, you're signing an exclusivity agreement that is also sort of guided by the NERC. So it is not just between you and the community. You have to present that, agreement to NERC, and the NERC has to do the final approval of that exclusivity agreement. And it has a timeline. Within 1 year, if you don't, fully develop the infrastructure in that community, it lapses, and another company can come and sign another exclusivity agreement with that community.
Okay,
so that's
fine.
essentially what it is.
Antitrust?
Sorry?
Antitrust, federal competition, and consumer protection. Because if you want to speak to that very quickly?
Yeah, so actually, I think the NEC have actually thought about everything that could go wrong. So the communities are empowered by this agreement to be able to terminate the contract if the service level or other issues are not delivered. And also, I want to say, from a private sector perspective, upon the announcement of this scheme by the government, the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, which is the revolving association from the private sector perspective, took a very proactive step to form a working group that will be enforce some sort of self-regulation within the sector to ensure sustainability and reliability of.
All right, Ifeanyi Orajaka, thank you. I just have to stop you. We can go on and on. We have a second issue for discussion, but I'd like to appreciate your contribution. Thank you. Ifeanyi Orajaka is a private solar power developer. Let me also appreciate the project lead, Solar Power Niger, #Solar Power Niger, Suleiman Babamanu. Thank you as always for coming. And the Managing Director, CEO, Rural Electrification Agency, Engineer Ahmed Salhijo. Thank you. Thank you for coming to Good Morning Nigeria. All right, and that's Claire Dilabo Abdul Razak. We'll see you tomorrow by God's grace. Meanwhile, stay safe and remember to wear a mask and, of course, obey social distancing rule.